marked by shadows. The year was 1127. Nestled in the misty embrace of the Carpathian Mountains was a secluded Jewish village named Kiryat Hashachar. The villagers lived simple lives, their days marked by toil and prayer. Yet beneath the surface of their pious existence lurked whispers of an ancient curse. No one dared speak of it openly, for the very mention of its name was said to summon misfortune. Eliyahu, a young scholar with sharp eyes and an insatiable curiosity, spent most of his days in the village's modest synagogue. For a village of its size, the synagogue boasted an impressive library, filled with scrolls and texts passed down through generations. It was here, amidst the faint aroma of old parchment, that Eliyahu stumbled upon a brittle, nearly illegible manuscript titled Shirat Hatzelim, the Song of Shadows. Eliyahu's heart ran as fast as his mind as he deciphered the first few lines. In the depths of the earth lies a secret, bound by shadows and blood. Those who seek it shall awaken what must never rise. The cryptic warning only fueled his determination. Eliyahu had always been drawn to the stories his late father used to tell him about the village's origins, a settlement built atop the ruins of an older, forgotten civilization. Could this manuscript hold the key to the mysteries his father spoke of? He revealed this finding to Rabbi Zechariah, who served as the spiritual leader in the village. A wise man of restraint, his face went ashen at what he found in the pages. This should not be discovered, he mumbled more or less to himself. It is a part of darkness. Darkness, Eliyahu prompted. His mind couldn't let this issue pass. Rabbi Zechariah let out a deep sigh. There are things better left buried, my son. This village thrives because we do not disturb what lies beneath us. Eliyahu did not believe his father. That night, as he lay in bed, he was tormented by weird dreams. He saw dark silhouettes dancing in the forest, their faces covered. A voice whispered his name, soft yet chilling. Eliyahu, come. The next day, Eliyahu came to his sister Miriam, a fiery spirit who drank as he did from the well of thirst for knowledge. With Shaul, their childhood friend, they decided to trek into the forest on the outskirts of the village. It was said that somewhere within its depths lay the ruins of the ancient civilization Rabbi Zechariah had spoken of. Their journey was full of eerie stillness. The buzz of life in the forest was almost absent and was replaced by oppressive silence. As they walked further, Miriam saw something odd. Carvings were etched into a moss-covered rock. They had never seen anything like that before. Spirals and lines pulsed faintly under the dim sunlight. This must be it, Miriam whispered, her voice trembling with awe and fear. They followed the carvings until they reached a crumbling stone structure, half swallowed by the earth. The entrance yawned like a mouth, dark and foreboding. We shouldn't go in, Shaul said, his voice trembling. This place feels wrong. But Eliyahu's curiosity had turned into obsession. If the shadows whisper of secrets, we must listen. Inside, the air was damp and thick with decay. Their torches flickered against the walls, revealing more of the odd carvings. The farther they proceeded, the whispers began. They were first faint and indistinct murmurs, then grew louder as if they came from all sides. Do you hear that? Miriam asked, her grip tightening on Eliyahu's arm. Before Shaul could answer the question, the ground under them shifted, and he stumbled. His torch fell. Its light went out. In the darkness, something moved. Something they couldn't see but could feel. Eliyahu! The voice from his dreams echoed through the cavern, sending chills down his spine. Shaul and Abiel panicked to get out of the cave. Finally, they emerged into the forest. The sunlight pounded through them, unnatural to their eyes. That night, the village began to transform. Shadows seemed to stretch and extend, almost as if they had a life of their own. There were claims of voices, one soft, insidious, as if drawing people out of their homes into the night. It was here that an aged woman, Hannah, a local with experience in folklore, approached Eliyahu. "You have unlocked it," she said firmly. "The shadow, the eater of secrets. It won't rest till it devours everything." Desperate for answers, she begged him to help her. He told her of an old ritual, one that could bind the shadow back to its slumber. But the ritual was a blood offering, and only decipherable from the complete Shirat Hatselim. As the first chapter closes, Eliyahu stands at a crossroads. Will he pursue the truth knowing that danger comes with it? Or will he heed the warnings and let the shadows consume the village? The whispers grew louder. By the second dawn after Eliyahu, Miriam, and Shaul's expedition to the ruins, Kiryat Hashachar was no longer the peaceful haven it once was. Shadows clung to the corners of homes like malevolent spirits. Farmers complained that their livestock refused to leave their pens, their eyes wide with terror as if seeing something unseen. Children cried through the night, muttering in languages they had never learned. Rabbi Zechariah summoned an emergency congregation in the synagogue. The villagers sat in tight-lipped silence as the rabbi spoke of legends they had elected to forget. Our ancestors told of the Shirat Hatzalim, the Song of Shadows, as a story to frighten us. The ruins you entered are not ruins, they are a prison. Gasps moved across the congregation. Shaul, who was seated at the back, buried his face into his hands. Eliyahu felt the rabbi's stare. "You led us into this," Zechariah said softly, but with firmness in his voice. "And now you must mend it." Eliyahu rose to his feet, trembling. "How?" "The shadows follow us. They're inside our heads, inside our breath. How do we fight something we cannot see?" Rabbi Zechariah looked over at Hannah, who nodded somberly. "There is a way, but it is not without sacrifice." That night, Eliyahu and Miriam found Hannah in her dimly lit house. The old woman spread out a tattered map, the edges worn and the marks faded. "This," she said, pointing to a symbol that looked like an eye surrounded by thorns, "is the source of the shadow's power, the place where the Shirat Hatselim was first inscribed." Miriam leaned closer. "But how can we destroy it?" Hannah's voice dropped to a whisper. "You don't destroy it. You bind it. The ritual requires 3 things: a sacred object, a willing sacrifice, and the blood of those who awakened it." Eliyahu paled. "Our blood?" Hannah nodded. "The shadows marked you the moment you entered the ruins. They will not stop until they consume you, or you bind them." Determined to find the treasured object, Eliyahu, Miriam, and Shaul returned to venture into the forest once more. Through Hannah's map, the 3 arrived at a secluded glade where an ancient tree stood. Its gnarled roots twisted like skeletal fingers toward the ground. The relic was marked beneath this old tree, a shard of that original tablet on which was carved the Shirat Hatselim. As they began to dig, the air grew colder. Shaul paused, his breath visible in the unnatural chill. "We're not alone," he whispered. The shadows came alive. At first they were faint wisps, but soon they solidified into grotesque forms. Hollow eyes glared from faces that seemed to shift and writhe. One of the creatures charged at Miriam, claws extended. Eliyahu reacted on impulse, murmuring a defensive prayer. The creature recoiled with a shrill cry, but was shoved forward by its friends. "Pray some more," Miriam screamed, producing a tiny, jagged piece of stone which was carved with intricate symbols. The moment the shard left the ground, the shadows froze, their forms dissolving into the air. But the reprieve was brief. A low, guttural growl emanated from the forest, followed by the sound of snapping branches. "We need to leave," Shaul said, his voice shaking. Back in the village, Hannah gazed upon the shard with reverence. "This is the key," she said, running her fingers over the symbols. "But it is also a beacon. The shadows will come for it." Rabbi Zechariah, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. "You can't stay here. The village is already at risk. You must take the shard to the source. Eliyahu protested. But we don't know what we're dealing with. What if we fail? Zechariah placed a hand on his shoulder. Faith, my son. It is all we have. That night, as people prepared for the group of travelers to leave, there was a storm. A thunderstorm that roared like some angry beast growling outside, and the rain pounded against rooftops. The villagers went into the synagogue for prayer, their voices a thin disguise against the dark creeping within. But the shadows had stopped crawling. They spilled into the village, under doors, through cracks in the wall. By midnight, the first scream sounded. Eliyahu, Miriam, and Shaul went out before dawn, armed with the shard, the map, and their prayers. Their path took them further into the mountains. Trees grew twisted, and the air grew thin. As they climbed, shadows became bolder. They saw faces in the mist, heard voices calling out their names, and felt unseen hands brushing against their skin. At one point, Miriam tripped over a root. As Shaul raised her to her feet, he went still. "Look," he whispered, pointing down at the ground. In the rock, carved there, was a single word, written in blood: Teshuvah, repentance. Eliyahu faltered in his resolve. Were they being warned to retreat further into the embrace of shadows? The chapter ends on the cliffhanger in which the group stands before the gaping entrance of a cavern, like the jaws of some monster. In there, deep inside, they knew existed the origin of shadows as well as their only possibility for redemption. The cave lay ahead, its mouth an opening slash of time and misery. Cold air oozed out of the mouth of it, carrying faint whispers that taunted and invited simultaneously. Eliyahu held the shard of obsidian tight in his hand. Its unnatural warmth throbbed against his palm. "Ready?" Miriam asked, her voice shaking as she moved the lantern on her arm a little. "We don't have a choice," Shaul replied, though his voice betrayed his unease. "If we don't confront it, the shadows will consume everything." Eliyahu nodded, swallowing hard. "Let's go." The three stepped into the darkness. Their footsteps sounded on uneven stone. The walls of the cavern seemed alive, shifting, pulsating, like ribs of a great sleeping beast. Strange symbols etched in the rock glowed faintly, casting strange patterns that danced in the dim light of their lanterns. The further down they went, the louder the whispers grew. The voices spoke in a language none of them understood, but the malice in their tone was unmistakable. It had felt like hours by the time they reached an enormous chamber. The walls were lined with tall reflective surfaces mirrors, but not ordinary ones. The glass shimmered unnaturally, showing distorted images of the trio. Eliyahu approached one warily, his reflection gazing back at him with empty eyes and a sickening grin. He recoiled, stumbling into Miriam. "These aren't mirrors," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "They're watching us." As if in answer, pictures began to change in the glass. Eliyahu saw himself as a baby, crying in the corner of an obscure room. Miriam's reflection showed her standing in some field of graves, her hands covered in blood. Shaul's reflection was something he would have been happier never to have seen. It was a shadowy presence looming over him, breathing in his ear as Shaul stood frozen. "Don't look," Shaul cautioned, ripping his gaze free. "It's trying to break us." It was already too late. Cracks appeared in the glass, and through those cracks, shadowy tendrils stretched themselves and came for the group, their ends sharper than daggers. "Run!" Eliyahu screamed as he pulled Miriam back from the gathering shadows. They ran further into the cavern, the tendrils pursuing them like hounds. The air chilled, and the ground under their feet slicked with a dark, viscous liquid, smelling of decay. Miriam stumbled, cried out as her lantern shattered, plunging them into near-total darkness. Eliyahu dropped to help her, but the shadows were closing in. Shaul spun, reciting a prayer, his lips trembling. The tendrils paused, quivering as if in torment, and retreated into the darkness. "That won't keep them long," Shaul said, hauling Miriam upright. A faint red glow showed down ahead, lighting the path. "The source," Eliyahu whispered. "It has to be close." The path led into another enormous room, and this one was dominated by a gigantic stone altar. Around it glowed more of the symbols, throbbing to the beat of a low, sonorous hum. On the altar lay an ancient scroll, covered in the same arcane symbols. It seemed to writhe alive, as if breathing, and from it emanated the haunting melody of the Shirat Hatzalim. Miriam hesitated. "That's it. The song. It's beautiful but wrong." Eliyahu stepped closer, his hand trembling as he reached for the scroll. The moment his fingers brushed the surface, a shockwave rippled through the chamber. The whispers became screams. The shadows erupted from the walls, taking on grotesque forms that defied explanation. Some had too many limbs, others had none. Their faces were hollow voids that seemed to consume the light. From the largest shadow, a figure emerged. It was tall and indistinct, its body a mass of writhing darkness. Two glowing eyes burned like coals in its featureless face. "You should not have come," it intoned, its voice resonating like a funeral dirge. Eliyahu took a step back, holding onto the shard. "We didn't mean to awaken this. We just want to stop it." The creature laughed, the sound like shattering glass. "You cannot stop what has already begun. The song is eternal, and now you will become part of it." The guardian raised a clawed hand, and the shadows surged toward them. Miriam grasped the shard from Eliyahu. Its warmth grew more intense, burning her hand, but she did not let go. "It's reacting to the song," she said through gritted teeth. She held it aloft, its symbols glowing brighter until they matched those on the scroll. The shadows recoiled, their forms flickering like dying flames. The guardian let out a howl of rage as it lunged toward Miriam. But Shaul stepped forward, reciting the binding prayer Hannah had taught them. The light of the shard became blinding, and the shadows screamed as they were pulled back toward the scroll. The guardian fought against the pull, its form dissolving as it reached for them one last time. The chamber was silent when the light faded. The scroll lay dormant on the altar, its glow extinguished. The trio staggered out of the chamber, exhausted and battered. The shadows were gone for now, but the song lingered in their minds, a haunting echo that refused to be silenced. "We've stopped it," Eliyahu said, though his voice lacked conviction. Miriam shook her head. "Number. We've only delayed it." They had crossed over into dawn, a world of pale light and shivering shadows, to find, after a silence broken, a village set down among trees. And yet everything seemed amiss. The air seemed still too long and red enough on the west. That which had bound shadows also now revealed an unstated price. The village was silent, with Eliyahu, Miriam, and Shaul returning from the cavern. The red glow of dawn cast an eerie hue on the cobblestone streets. Each house was once filled with life, now a hollow shell, with dark and lifeless windows. "Where is everyone?" Miriam whispered to herself, her voice very low. Eliyahu's grip on the shard tightened. "We must find Hannah. She'll know what to do." The farther into the village, the air pressed down like a physical force had settled across their shoulders. Once familiar streets felt strange. The echoes of shadows laced along those streets refused to completely lift. The three reached the synagogue. Its doors were open but a little ajar. Inside, the sanctuary was dimly lit with a faint glow from the candles flickering on the altar. The sacred objects were untouched, but there was an air of abandonment. "Hannah?" Shaul called, his voice ringing out through the empty hall. There was no response. Instead, the faint hum of the Shirat Hatzalim grew louder, coming from the Torah Ark. Miriam approached cautiously, her heart pounding. When she opened the ark, she gasped. The Torah scroll was gone, replaced by an ancient, weathered book bound in black leather. Its cover was etched with the same cryptic symbols they had seen in the cavern. "What is this?" she asked, her voice trembling. Eliyahu leaned in, the shard glowing dimly in response to the book. "It's part of the puzzle, the song. It's connected to this somehow." As they walked out of the synagogue, the whispers resumed. This time, they were louder, more insistent, coming from the walls and the earth beneath their feet. "They're here," Shaul said, his eyes scanning wildly. They never left. The shadows began to take on a life of their own, slithering along the edges of the buildings. Their forms were more defined now, humanoid figures with elongated limbs and featureless faces. "Keep moving," Eliyahu urged, leading them toward Hannah's home. The streets seemed to twist and shift, turning into a labyrinth that defied logic. Every path they took led them back to the same square, where a shadowy figure stood waiting. The figure was taller than the others, its form draped in tattered robes that seemed to merge with the darkness. In its hands, it held a lyre, its strings glowing faintly. "You carry the shard," the figure said, its voice deep and resonant, yet strangely melodic. "It is both your salvation and your curse." "Who are you?" Miriam demanded, her fear giving way to anger. The figure tilted its head. "I am the keeper. The song you seek to silence was born long before your kind. It cannot be undone." Eliyahu stepped forward. "We don't want to undo it. We want to stop its spread." The keeper let out a hollow laugh. "The song is eternal, but perhaps there is a way to contain it." The keeper thrust forth a bony hand. "The shard and the book are keys," he said. "Together they could bind the song, but at a cost." "What cost?" Shaul asked, his wariness apparent. "One of you must take my place," the keeper replied. "Only then will the shadows recede and the song silenced within this realm." There was heavy, oppressive silence after the words the keeper had spoken settled across the group. "There has to be another way," Miriam said, her voice breaking. "There is not," the keeper said. "Choose, or the song will consume all." The trio huddled together, their voices hushed. "I'll do it," Shaul said finally, his expression resolute. "I'm the oldest. I've lived my life." "No," Eliyahu said firmly. "This started because of me. I'll end it." Miriam shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "We can't lose any of us. There has to be another way." But the keeper was unmoving. "Decide." The shadows grow restless. As the shadows began to close in, Eliyahu stepped forward, holding the shard in one hand and the book in the other. "I'll take your place," he said, his voice steady despite the fear in his heart. The keeper waved her hand to the altar that had materialized in the square. The shard and book both seemed to burn with an inner flame, their illumination mingling as Eliyahu placed them upon the stone before him. "Repeat after me," the keeper intoned, speaking the words in ancient tongue of the song. He spoke, and each syllable came like power, dissolving forms. The shadows ran backward in agony and hid from light, as all was white within him now, and the whispers came up louder, then subsided. The last word spoke by Eliyahu, light encompassed him in an overwhelming brilliance. The darkness vanished, and instead stood Eliyahu himself, with otherworldly light shining out from his eyes. Miriam and Shaul look at Eliyahu. Their friend changed. "Eliyahu," Miriam whispers, reaching out to him. "I am still me," he said, but the voice had the song, weight upon it. "But I cannot leave this place." The village returned into view, into its former being, and yet it came at such a cost. "We will find a way to free you," Miriam promised through tears streaming down her face. Eliyahu smiled faintly. "The song is silenced for now. That's all that matters." As dawn broke, the village awakened. its residents oblivious to the battle that had been fought. Miriam and Shaul walked away, their hearts heavy with the loss of their friend. The village was eerily calm after Eliyahu's transformation. The shadows had retreated, and the suffocating whispers had been replaced by an unnatural silence. The villagers, oblivious to the events that had transpired, returned to their routines. But for Miriam and Shaul, the world had changed irreparably. The synagogue stood there as a grim reminder of their loss. Inside, the altar at which Eliyahu had accepted his fate was now an immovable stone monument. The black book remained sealed, bound by the shard's energy. The air inside was heavy with an oppressive stillness, and Miriam could feel the weight of the song pressing down on her soul. "We can't leave him like this," Miriam said, her voice barely above a whisper. Shaul nodded, his face etched with exhaustion. "But what can we do? The keeper said there's no other way." "There has to be," Miriam said, determination hardening her voice. "We didn't come this far to lose him forever." As the days elapsed, strange happenings began to plague the village. The shadows, now weakened, lingered at the very edges of the forest, their forms growing more distinct each night. Animals vanished without a trace, and the villagers began to whisper of figures standing in their doorways, watching them in silence. Miriam pored over the ancient book, its cryptic symbols shifting under her gaze. Each page seemed to hum with a faint melody, resonating with the shard embedded in the altar. "This isn't just a prison," she muttered to herself, tracing the lines of a diagram that looked like an ancient seal. "It's a map." Shaul leaned over her shoulder. "A map to what?" "To the source of the song," Miriam said. "If we can find it, perhaps we can destroy it." "But the keeper said that the song is eternal," Shaul said. Miriam raised her eyes to his. "Then we'll rewrite it." The map took them deep into the forest, to a place where air grew colder with each step. The trees seemed to whisper, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal hands. They came upon a clearing where the ground was unnaturally smooth, as if polished by some unseen forces. In the middle stood an ancient stone archway covered in the same symbols as the book. "This is it," Miriam said, her breath fogging in the icy air. Shaul hesitated. "If we go through, there's no turning back." Miriam nodded, gripping the book tightly. "We owe it to Eliyahu." They stepped through the archway, and the world dissolved into darkness. On the other side, they found themselves in a vast, desolate expanse. The ground was black glass, reflecting a crimson sky streaked with shifting shadows. In the distance, a massive structure loomed, a towering spire that pulsed with a sickly red light. "The source," Miriam said, her voice trembling. As they got closer, shadows became shapes twisted, human figures moving unnaturally fluidly. Their eyes had that same spire light, and their movements were in step with each other, as if they were all being conducted by an unseen conductor. "We're not alone," Shaul said, pulling out a rusted dagger he had taken from the village. "They're part of the song," Miriam realized, "if we can disrupt it." She opened the book, and the symbols began to glow faintly. The melody from the pages became louder, clashing with the song in the air. Inside the spire, the walls were alive, pulsing with a rhythm that mirrored the beating of their hearts. In the center was the huge organ, its pipes reaching up into the darkness above. Sitting before it was a figure in shadow, its fingers moving across the keys with inhuman speed. "Eliyahu?" Miriam called out, her voice echoing in the chamber. It was only his head which moved to expose something utterly terrible, something almost monstrous, an unworkable agglomeration of faces, each one writhing in torture. "You want to finish something that can't be finished," said the creature in a voice of sounds and noises. "We come to set him free," Miriam said, her voice steady in spite of the fear creeping up in her veins. The creature laughed, making the walls shake. "Then you must take his place." Miriam advanced, book held aloft. The shard in the altar started to glow, and its light cut through the blackness. "This song has held us captive for far too long," she declared, her voice echoing with the rhythm of the book. "It is time to rewrite it." The creature lunged, but Shaul got in its way, his dagger flashing. "Do it now," he yelled, wrestling with the monster. Miriam opened the book to the final page, where a blank staff of music waited. Taking a deep breath, she began to sing. The melody that emerged was unlike anything she had ever heard, pure, untainted by the darkness. The shadows recoiled, their forms dissolving into smoke. The creature screamed, its many faces writhing as the organ began to crumble. And then the last note was gone, and the spire was consumed in a blinding explosion of light. Miriam and Shaul sat there in the village square. The altar was gone. Eliyahu stood before them, whole and unharmed. His eyes, once burning with the light of the song, were now clear. "It's over," he said, relief written in his voice. Miriam nodded, her face streaming with tears. "We did it." With the breaking of dawn, the whole village was bathed in golden light. Shadows were gone, and the song was silenced forever.